Welcome again everyone, and hello to you all. Before I continue, perhaps I should just make one brief explanation as to the strange headgear I'm wearing today, which if you look at this very closely you will see is a celebration of New York and America. I think my wife and I, Linda, purchased this particular cap while we were actually crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. But the key thing is I'm wearing it today because exactly 1 year ago, Linda and I were in Bryant Park, New York, and I was performing my poetry. And later on in the day, I was in the Princeton Club in Manhattan, also performing poetry. I was working with some wonderful American poets, Teresa Rodriguez, James B. Nicola, Mark F. Stone, and the wonderful Evan Mantic. And I just thought today was a celebratory day to remind me I can't be in New York now. I'm here in the UK, I'm in England, but a year ago there we were, and I'd like to commemorate it. So that's a little tipping of my hat to America and New York. Now, back to HellWard. We've now reached Canto 8. We've been through a whole lot of stuff, and you know what that is, so I'm not going to recount it today. We now move on to something which you may regard as perhaps even more serious and deserving of being in hell. But unfortunately, some years ago, my wife and I found that we were near neighbours to a murderer. In fact, it was a murder that made the national newspapers, the 6 o'clock news. It was a particularly horrific murder of one of our neighbours, of his wife. And when it went to trial, all sorts of very unpleasant things came out, and actually I had encountered these people several times. We were relatively new to the area and I ran into them. I have to say, for example, with the guy himself, I simply couldn't make eye contact. There was something very evasive, very shifty about them, and obviously from that you couldn't deduce a murder would take place, but something very, very, very serious did happen, and therefore I'd like to recount this in lyric form in Canto 8 called Neighbour Murderer. I staggered upwards as his arms held me, sobbing and cold, yet grateful too for what I'd seen, though blinded, for still I was free from Dobbin's tentacles, dark webs, hard knots. Forward we went, as backwards into depths of nothing Dobbin floundered, quite lost, invisible now and wholly without strength. But he who was beside me, him I knew, the poet whose words were power and truth. Confused, my sight still faltering in its view, I owe you everything, I said, but where, as Dobbin charmed me with his guile, were you? How stern then Dante in his might appeared to me. I simply beside him a child, yet still he answered, tone blistering, sear, you know your being is to be defiled, so why require the master intercede on your behalf, or block what you self-willed? There comes a time when overwhelming need dictates my force is given leave to play. But here your own corruption plays indeed. Real heroes determine, make their true way, which you so failed to do. And yet, his voice then faltered, as lost in some profound amaze. And yet I saw as you a special grace which decay forms, the fabric of the world, before which evil turns blind and goes hoarse, as wisdom, beautiful, is thus revealed. Though your eyes were barely lifted to see, mine own Athene's glory lit up, filled. Heaven, though you remain in misery, cannot be held in check, restrained or stopped. And I was where forever I must be, despite how far this place we share has dropped. If I'd felt bad before, his words now scourged my vital spirits, flayed all I had hoped about myself, my being, so not purged of all its predilection for huge ill. The universe was no song now, but dirged along in faltering steps until it fell into some silence too scary even to contemplate, much less witness at all, as I did now, the absence of that heaven. But Dante saw my distress, and pity flows, though we do not see its power till it's proven, until the balm's applied that heals the blow. Myself, like you, was once all strut and pride, could look unmoved on what went on below, not sensing in my soul what it would hide. But those who seek salvation simply must face every deception to which they're tied. There is no other way. Ahead, the dust awaits, and before you sense its covering, divest yourself of greed and pride and lust. Look deep, my son, your weeds are there flowering. But where you go, if there you truly want, your heart must find the seeds of love's real gathering. For that's the antidote for all rank plants, such that you're weak to even think of them, while thinking cuts itself to end up blunt. So said my master, and I heeded him. We descended now a stairwell, polished, smooth to the touch, but touching congealed phlegm, like nacre in its coating, hard but proof that all that glitters is not pearl or gold. For within this coating the core was wrath, and as I thought of it, my blood went cold. Arriving at a corridor just like that alley leading to the underworld, where neighbours we'd known and seen in the light toiled in their way across the cut, dividing our properties, the lines defining right, there I recalled that strange and disobliging phenomena. Houses round, posh and neat, and yet each day for some years, rubbish lying, dumped and deliberate, littering the street, put down like defecation in the dark, soiling the living where they meet for spite. The mess, the filth. Then I came to his ward, and peering in saw Peter there, austere, preoccupied, as hiding what? More fraud? Unmuffled sounds, stifled, a boot parked there, from which some long agony enclosed, hid, sought its redress, release, too hard to bear to be encased so, bandaged to be rid of, and disposed. What was it he had done? And where was his wife, the woman he'd wed, whom I had seen outside their front garden, pruning such amaranths as live forever, as I suppose, and her new Eve, its warden? But Peter, surely, heard us then, but never lifted his eyes to greet new company, instead preoccupied in his own fever of counting slips of paper, one, how many? Who knew but he who reckoned, and for what? If he could tally right, then he'd have plenty. Yet all the while, as he just shuffled, sat, the muffling, mixed with a scratching sound, increased, as if behind some giant rat would not lie down decently dead of wounds. Instead, crave life once more, and all its riot. No metal box could stop or keep her bound, and no ignoring too would make her quiet. So what could Peter do, or hope to do? If she would disappear, then he'd inherit 400,000. But how make it so? I saw him then, stopping the devil count, resolving, fists clenched, to have a go. Why not? What lose? If lost in debt, debts mount. And hell, what did he care for her? For life, he said himself. She's just another cunt. The paper slips, the sums made up his wife, now fluttered in the breezeless air, propelled by static rubbed from off his skin, as if blades freed from the soul, dark where they indwelled. Some spilled into the alleyway to loiter, join all the shit he'd made his life and filled. But most, the others, like magnetic pointers, turned to the boot as one cut through the lock, revealing whose pain occupied its centre. There, her finger stretched itself in shock, trembling with degrees no earthly nail could, demanding air around him be his dock and judge, according to all that was good. For would not pure air know it? In his hand, his hammer raised to crush her at her root, remove all trace, pulverise to the ground. How he glowed then, a traffic light gone red, bright red, as if beyond money he'd found what he'd always wanted, to kill the dead beyond any chance they'd return or heal. So now, as hammer hovered about to speed, then Lee let forth her scream, primal and shrill, as one soprano might who shatters glass, despite how hard the glass or set its will to not break down. So now Peter, aghast, involuntarily stupefied, stepped back. And not only him. The vocal blast amazed Dante, who, though paradise prepped, inured as it were to all our suffering, suddenly felt again the mortal depths from which heaven itself had been his buffering, till now. And I could not bear the pain, the voice, the broken heart, and its offering. Thinking, obliterated in the strain of hearing her hurt that would never still. Stop, I stammered, rambling and in vain, for I felt resistless, bereft of will and more, such was her sound, desire to live. How long suspended in that state of nil, who knows? Only at last there came reprieve, as Dante raised me and her cry was gone. At last then my chance to strengthen revive, but as I mounted, limbs felt like they were stone, which I could barely flex or mobilise. I wanted so much to see what was done. My body could not turn, only my eyes swiveled in their sockets, popping to see this killer who'd married and vowed with lies. For marriage on marriage means bigamy, alongside the murder now on his hands. Had he ever one shred of care for Lee? My neck clicked sharp as some vertebral strands snapped back into place, so I began thawing with pity even, it seemed, for the damned here before me, horrors always gnawing deep into being and their dead souls. Released, I turned now to witness their warring, to find him smouldering like some burnt-out coal, which even as its surface cools and ashes form, its hot interior still from its central pole continues threshing heat and toxic storms towards her whom he'd sworn to love, protect. And she, freed now from the brute, free to swarm all over him, who'd also sold her sex, pimped her at parties, not regarding woman, the divine feminine, its power to hex the male and subtract all that is human. Now she did. Her voice had paralysed through its high pitch the power of this con-man, but now, attentive, his heat neutralised, and arched beside his burning ear she perched, not bird-like, but as bees, billion-eyed and buzzing low, so almost scarcely heard, but faintly now what I had not before. The hum was clear, but not for me her words. These only he could hear, some music score written by madness to the orbit of his brain. I saw him flinch, as if at core his eye some bee stung, stinging not enough, dying, another took its place to sting. How he raged then, each prick so fine, yet rough as poison, like sandpaper scraping in, only as liquid, free to flow and scrub his surfaces and strip his very being. Her high notes first to penetrate and probe, freeze all his burning, remit his heat back, so he himself could feel his own heat's rub, then buzzing, deep, sticky, keeping him stuck to suffering he'd made. How his colour changed and changed again, from red to white to black, as all her sounds he writhed to have expunge. To enter silence, oh, his soul might be immersed, be plunged into the stillness of a vacant wood, where cosmic nothings flit in shadow shapes, no sound, no light, nor even morrow should upsets their vagaries or killing japes, where cursing one who never was or is provokes no payback or endless mishap, then that, not this, would be eternal bliss. If only. And still, I saw him wrestle with fate, attempt to own it, make it wholly his. But always in the din I heard, too late. Some last vestige of lost meaning, noise had to strain to whisper and articulate. Before my eyes he seemed to be unmade, as moment by moment his colour dimmed and all his vital strength began to fade. But his contagion invited me in. A kind of panic overwhelmed me now. Existence once so full through him waned thin. He'd been no sun, but moon, and moon's too glow. But even that light seemed crippled and weak, and in its faltering and just overthrow, I felt a fascination with the bleak and fatal, which held me to my own shame. For rather than move to that which I seek, I stood there stupefied, until my name, suddenly in one sharp and savage bark, broke through my fog, exposing the grim game, betraying souls to loiter in their dark. Dante had called, and his expression held no warmth, but rather a contempt so sharp, I knew how he'd been moved to sense the world again, absent so long in paradise. His hand into my shoulder, a rough meld, forced me forward to some alternative where I might revel